Yeah. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. It is good to see you and it's good to be here. So make sure you have some paper and a pencil or something to write with. And this morning we have Shawn with us, and I think we all know that Shawn is the wife of our pastor Peter. They have 3 children, 2 of whom are in college. One, Whittier, is at home and is active in our church life. But here's some information about Shawn. Shawn Samuelson Henry grew up in Hanover, New Hampshire, and earned degrees from Bucknell University, Harvard University, and the University of Wyoming. Shawn taught English to teenagers for more than a decade. She is an avid playwright whose plays have won competitions and been produced across the United States and Canada. And she is the author of Made in Maine, which is classified as a young adult novel, but explores serious adult themes. A number of us in the room when Shawn gave a book review were just amazed, and we said we would love to have her present or teach at Covenant. Do you think she'd do it? And so we asked, and Shawn said yes. So she will lead us today in the beginning of a 2-week series on the art of kindness, where we will examine civility, gratitude, and kindness through literature and personal experiences. Thank you, Shawn.
Okay. I don't know how loudly to speak, so is this too loud? Is this okay? Okay. Thank you, Pam, and thank you to Missy for their kindness in inviting me to this class. They were exceptionally organized as they pondered the content of what this class might look like. And that was way back in the spring. We met over lemonade and homemade cookies. I extend, he's gone. I extend my thanks to John too, and to Missy and Pam, because they were, okay, John. Okay. They were so patient and frequently would reach out, how's it coming? How's your plan? Anything we can do? And every time I deflected, because it wasn't until this week that I decided what I was doing. So thank you. All right, so my theme is the art of kindness. And bear with me as I take you with me on the journey of how I got to it. So last week I was at my brother's house in Maine. And on the walls of his beautiful house are several paintings that were done by our mutual nephew, another brother's son. And I looked at these paintings that Dylan did, and I was struck by an artist's unusual ability to take a raw material, in this case, globs of paint, and make it into something beautiful, to designate to give it meaning. So how does something go? Okay, here goes.
There goes John.
Okay, how does something go from this to something like this? And I'm looking right at Pidge, and I know she makes that magic. Okay, so there are obviously infinite forms of art, and here are a few. So here's our raw material, appropriate for a Sunday morning. And then we can go from this and this to this. Okay, time out just for a second. I'm giving you exactly 1 minute to think of some other kinds of art, where you take raw material and make it into something that has meaning. And you can just jot a few of those down. And I'm watching the clock. 5 seconds have already gone. Okay, I still see pencils moving, but I'm going to stop you. Don't even need to raise your hand, just call out. What kinds of art did you arrive at?
Plants and landscape.
Awesome, horticulture, right?
Words.
Is that the right word?
That's good.
Okay,
Word.
words, yes.
Sewing,
Flower arranging,
sewing.
sewing,
Singing. Singing.
singing, awesome, music.
Stone. That you carve.
Oh, beautiful, yes, yes.
And wood.
And wood,
Pottery.
ceramics, yes.
Basket weaving.
Basket weaving. Oh my
Wool
goodness, this
braid.
class is awesome.
Stone.
Stone, yep.
Wool threads.
In wool,
Glass
knitting,
blowing.
crocheting,
Glass blowing.
glass blowing,
Designing and making an automobile.
beautiful.
Teams.
Did you say?
Teams.
Teams, oh, I love that, absolutely.
A human being.
Jewelry making.
Beautiful, making a human being, making jewelry. Okay, so you guys totally got this. Okay, I love that. I love the creativity already in here. Okay, so for me, the medium with which I am most familiar is this, words. Scrabble,
Scrabble.
yes. Although whenever we play Scrabble, Peter gets all mad because he writes really long, thoughtful words, and I'll get like 25 points for adding an S or something, and he just has that sort of sheet. Okay, but this is exciting to me, to have an idea and to make that idea real. These are my tools, to rearrange these into words, and then into sentences, and then into paragraphs, and ultimately into a story, whether that story takes place on a stage or in the pages of a book. Just a quick aside, I've been asked how I got into novel writing, and my answer is twofold. The first answer lies directly in my career as an English teacher. I loved hanging with teenagers as they read and wrote and learned and always laughed. But then when we had 3 children under the age of 4, my guilt was constant and for me overwhelming. Many people can teach and mother with grace, and I just felt like I wasn't doing either job as well as I wanted to. So there's that side. Pause just for a moment as I leap into the second reason. I've been lucky enough to have my short plays produced, literally from coast to coast. One of them, this is a little PSA. One of them will be produced next week, the following week, at the Davison Community Players has a 10-minute play festival with a Halloween theme. This year we have a grant, so admission is free. It's the 24th, 25th, and 26th at Armour Street. It's called Booze and Brews. You have to get a ticket, but it is free. Anyway, on occasion, I was able to go to Colorado or Pennsylvania or Illinois and sit in the audience and see my play on stage. And it was a profound experience if it was well done. to see how the actors using my words could move the audience. And so having had that experience, I thought, I wonder if I could do it, if I could move people with my words on the pages, since I wasn't teaching anymore. This is a way I could reach teenagers. So I tried it. I did a little anonymous, I wrote a novel anonymously, and I read it to my 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders when I was a children's librarian, and they did not know that I had written the book. And it was an age-appropriate thriller that took place in the Winter Olympics in Seoul, and it ultimately involved this blood doping scandal, and the children were riveted. And so that was encouraging to me, to know that I could move people with my words. So that's how I got into it. So back to Made in Maine. It is a young adult book. This is what Pam was talking about. But the great irony is many more people over the age of 40 than under have read it. Okay, there are many ways to tell a story. And going back to the paint, we have, oh dear.
Yeah.
Well, you got the point. It kind of chopped it off. That's my bad. This is Norman Rockwell. His art graced the cover of many Saturday Evening Post magazines. He was dismissed in his time as a mere illustrator, but I think he was a master storyteller. And here, you guys know who this is?
Yes.
Yeah, Ruby Bridges. And the title of this painting is The Problem We All Live With. Okay, so my question is, why do we tell stories? And I'm throwing that out to you. And you can just toss out a response. Why do we tell stories?
To make meaning of experiences.
Absolutely, to make meaning of experiences.
To
Way
educate.
of introducing ourselves.
Absolutely. We introduce ourselves by telling a story.
To entertain.
Sure. So much of literature is for that very purpose, to entertain.
To challenge.
To challenge, yes, interesting.
To record your history.
Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, yes, absolutely.
To educate.
To educate
Connection.
and connection, fantastic, okay.
Let me bring up one that we all know, I hope. Jeannie Robertson, she's deceased now, but she's a humor, was a humor. And so she brings humor to people.
Sure, to bring
Joy.
laughter, to bring levity, to bring lightness, yes, yeah. And all part of that entertainment.
Right.
I recently attended an event in Kannapolis. This was just last week. It was sponsored by the Mount Pleasant Library, and it featured the extraordinary William Kent Kruger. And if you don't know him, he's a prolific novelist. My 2 favorite novels of his are This Tender Land and Ordinary Grace. So in his presentation, he asked us, how does the Bible begin? Oh yeah, there is a little theology in this. I forgot about that. All right, class, how does the Bible begin?
In the beginning.
That's exactly how we responded. In the beginning was the Word. However, he shook his head and said, actually, that may be how it is written, but what precedes that is, let me tell you a story. So of course the Bible is filled with stories, and Jesus taught using parables. For some of us, for whom statistics and numerical data mean much more when it's accompanied by a story, well, some of us learn best. That was a terrible sentence, but you know what I mean. When there is a story, There are characters, conflict, action, plot, resolution, and then the story becomes relatable, even if it's fantasy or science fiction. If you think about mythology or the wild success of Harry Potter or Ray Bradbury or Stephen King, they may not be realistic, but they are stories to which we can relate. Okay, many of you and other DCPC members were part of a very thoughtful literary analysis and discussion of Percival Everett's novel, James, in August, right here. And Lynette's husband, Joe Popovich, was our fearless leader in this. For those of you who don't know this book, in brief, it's the story of Jim, the runaway slave, or the slave who runs away with Huck in Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And at the heart of his portrayal lies empathy, respect, compassion, and a deeply rooted sense of humanity. While Twain's novel is a subtle but scathing critique of our country's legacy of slavery, in that Jim is a relatively flat character. He serves as an important symbol, of course, but readers don't really get to witness his growth or his development as they do in Everett's novel. Everett restores dignity to Jim, or James, and he humanizes him. His name is no longer a diminutive nickname. He is highly educated, self-taught by devouring the tomes in his master's library. And Everett turns James from this cardboard cutout into a fully imagined human being who suffers and grieves and struggles and hopes, just like all of us. So I'm going to read a brief passage from James. My name is James. I wish I could tell my story with a sense of history as much as industry. I was sold when I was born, and then I was sold again. My mother's mother was from someplace on the continent of Africa, I had been told or simply assumed. I cannot claim any knowledge of that world or those people, whether they were kings or beggars. I can tell you that I am a man who is cognizant of his world, a man who has a family, who loves a family, who has been torn from his family, a man who can read and write, a man who will not let his story be self-related, but self-written. With my pencil, I wrote myself into being. So that's the end of that quote. So James has this pencil, and it's really just a stub because another slave, a young boy, stole it and gave it to him. While the child is flogged, ultimately to death for this infraction, he mouths to James, "Run." Even at his tender age, he knows the power of the written word and of this legacy. I really delight in the parallel structure of James and of Percival Everett leaving the world permanently altered because of their writing. Okay, so Maya Angelou, an icon in the American literary world. She was a prolific poet, a memoirist, an essayist, a play director, and a lecturer all the way into her 80s. She was born in 1928 and died in 2014. She's probably best known for her 4-book memoir, and this is the first of those 4. This is probably most often, this particular edition is taught in high schools, or it used to be. I'm not sure if it is anymore. But when she was 8 years old, she was raped by her mother's boyfriend, a man named Freeman. She was understandably traumatized by this, and she felt as if she could not tell anyone. But she did tell her brother, Bailey, and Bailey was her best friend. Her given name is Marguerite, but her brother called her Maya's sister, and that's where Maya came from. So Bailey, horrified, told the rest of his family, and Freeman, the man, was found guilty, but he was jailed for 1 day. And 4 days after his release, he was murdered. And no one knows who murdered him, but the speculation is that it was Maya's uncles who were furious. So traumatic was this event that Maya became mute for almost 5 years. And she writes, because she thought that Freeman's death was her fault because she spoke. So she writes, I thought my voice killed him. I killed that man because I told his name. And then I thought I would never speak again because my voice would kill anyone. So then you fast forward till Angelou is 65. She was the featured speaker at Clinton's inauguration. And I've chosen to show this clip, not for any political reasons whatsoever, but for her ultimate message. And it comes in the very last line of her poem. And because after having been mute for most of her childhood, then she was on a stage, a world stage, where millions watched.
Click it one more time.
Mr. President and Mrs. Clinton, Mr. Vice President and Mrs. Gore, and Americans everywhere. A rock, a river, a tree, hosts to species long since departed, mark the mastodon, the dinosaur, who left dry tokens of their sojourn here on our planet floor. Any broad alarm of their hastening doom is lost in the gloom of dust and ages. But today, the rock cries out to us, clearly, forcefully, come, you may stand upon my back and face your distant destiny, but seek no haven in my shadow. I will give you no hiding place down here. You, created only a little lower than the angels, have crouched too long in the bruising darkness, have lain too long face down in ignorance, your mouths spilling words armed for slaughter. The rock cries out to us today, you may stand upon me, but do not hide your face. Across the wall of the world, a river sings a beautiful song. It says, come, rest here by my side. Each of you, a bordered country, delicate and strangely made, proud, yet thrusting perpetually under siege. Your armed struggles for profit have left collars of waste upon my shore, currents of debris upon my breast. Yet today, I call you to my riverside, if you will study war no more. Come, clad in peace, and I will sing the songs the Creator gave to me when I and the tree and the rock were one. Before cynicism was a bloody sear across your brow, and when you yet knew, you still knew nothing. The river sang and sings on. There is true yearning to respond to the singing river and the wise rock. So say the Asian, the Hispanic, the Jew, the African, the Native American, the Sioux, the Catholic, the Muslim, the French, the Greek, the Irish, the rabbi, the priest, the sheik, the gay, the straight, the preacher, the privileged, the homeless, the teacher, they all hear the speaking of the tree. They hear the first and last of every tree speak to humankind today. Come to me, here, beside the river. Plant yourself beside the river. Each of you, descendant of some passed on traveler, has been paid for. You who gave me my first name, you Pawnee, Apache, Seneca, you Cherokee Nation, who rested with me, then forced on bloody feet, left me to the employment of other seekers, desperate for gain, starving for gold. You the Turk, the Arab, the Swede, the German, the Eskimo, the Scot, you the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Kru, bought, sold, stolen, arriving on a nightmare, praying for a dream. Here, root yourselves beside me. I am that tree planted by the river which will not be moved. I the rock, I the river, I the tree, I am yours. Your passages have been paid. Lift up your faces. You have a piercing need for this bright morning dawning for you. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it into the palms of your hand. Mold it into the shape of your most private needs. Sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your heart. Each new hour holds new chances for new beginnings. Do not be wedded forever to fear, yoked eternally to brutishness. The horizon leans forward, offering its space to place new things. Here, on the pulse of this fine day, you may have the courage to look up and out and upon me, the rock, the river, the tree, your country. No less to Midas than the mendicant, no less to you now than the mastodon then. Here, on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply, with hope, good morning.
That's so moving. And I think that that message in this very contentious political climate is more needed than ever. I'm going to share a little bit, one more poem with you before giving you your test. No, before giving you your assignment. And this poem was one that Missy and Pam introduced to me. And the poet is a young woman named Morgan Harper Nichols. Here she is. Let me hold the door for you. I may have never walked in your shoes, but I can see your soles are worn. Your strength is torn under the weight of a story I have never lived before. Let me hold the door for you. After all you've walked through is the least I can do. So both Nichols and Angelou's poems feature empathy and kindness, which ultimately is the seed or the theme of this class. So obviously I am hogging the floor this week, but next week I want to hear from you. So this is your assignment. I want you to think back. It could be to yesterday, it could be 80 years ago. And think back to one small, act of kindness that made a difference in your life, and I mean tiny. If someone gave you a kidney, that's amazing, but that's way bigger in scope than this little assignment. It was meaningful and significant enough that you still remember it. And write about it. Or if some of you have a different form of art with which you are more comfortable, you can sculpt about it, or paint about it, or do origami or quilt or something. I mean, well, that's a little much for this little assignment. But you have a pencil and you have paper, and I would love to hear your story. And I didn't ask my boss here. Is that okay if we can have people come up? Phew. Okay. Don't worry if you're meter, if you want to do a poem, don't worry about meter, don't worry about rhyming, don't worry about punctuation, grammar, anything. Just write it because it's coming from your heart. If you would like an example, there is I think I have this here we go. Through Hidden Brain, there is a podcast series called My Unsung Hero, and you might, if you want, you can jot this down. I see some people nodding their heads. You know about this. In it, there are many tiny stories. I think they're fewer than 5 minutes, where somebody is telling a story about someone who was very kind to them at a moment in need. In many cases, they weren't able to say thank you, and this is their way of saying thank you. But it's a really uplifting podcast. And I'm going to give you an example. But when I told Peter I was doing this, he said, "What are you doing? Because yours is way too long. Like, that's not what you wanted." And I said, "I know, I'm going to tell them not to do it this way. Like, the sentiment is there, but mine's way too long because I wrote it for something else." So we could go through and parse out, excise the parts that don't need to be here. But we won't. But I will just tell this story. Wait, I want to see oh, shoot. How do I go back?
One more.
Okay. I had a different, sorry. Okay. So again, this is way too long because if everyone wrote one this long, we'd only get through a couple. But the sentiment is there. It was a tiny, tiny act of kindness that happened many years ago in my life, but I obviously still remember it. It's called Flowers in My Hair. And you don't have to have a title for yours, but I did. From the window of the tiny 8-seater plane, I watched Wyoming disappear. Goodbye, cowboys and rodeos. Goodbye, skiing and hiking from my backyard. Goodbye, Coal Creek Coffee Company, social hub of our little town. I was off to that land of multicultural diversity and liberal tolerance. A city of impossible natural beauty, teeming with action and ideas. I was off to San Francisco. Before I left, I waltzed around my apartment, obviously alone, no one could hear me, belting out Scott McKenzie's lyrics.
If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair.
Unfortunately, my exuberance was greatest in the anticipation stage. The flowers wilted a bit when I visited the school that had flown me out for an interview. Sure, the students were extremely bright and the faculty dedicated, but not a blade of grass grew on the entire campus. There was a lovely courtyard, I was proudly informed, where people could eat their lunch on sunny days. I looked. Concrete with a plastic tree in one corner. My dismay increased. I sought reassurance from an old boyfriend, a student at UCSF Medical School, whom I met for dinner. Instead, he smiled sadly. You know, Shawn, I think it's great that you came out for the interview, but I really can't picture you living here. You're not aggressive enough. Rather than yank the scabs off old wounds about my lack of assertiveness, I swallowed my indignation along with a big forkful of salad and changed the subject. I asked Steve where I could go for a long run the next day as I was training for an upcoming marathon. Steve, a veteran long-distance runner, had logged thousands of miles in the city. How far do you want to go? 20 miles or so? Not more than 22. He gave me a large fold-out map and plotted my course. I'm sending you through the park, across the bridge, then down by the ocean. It's the greenest route I can find. I started at dawn the next morning. This was in the early 90s, long before cell phones and GPS tracking. Rather than carry the map, marking me in neon as a tourist, I wrote the directions on my arm. The early miles passed quickly. I was surprised, though, and rather annoyed by all the people in my way. And few smiled or said hello. In Wyoming, I'd go for miles with only the antelope for company. When a rare runner or cyclist passed, he'd call out a greeting and give me a quick high five. Was I invisible here? I ran over the Golden Gate Bridge and back, and then headed down to the ocean. 3 hours later, I was hopelessly lost. The directions on my arm had long since sweated off, and few people I'd asked for help just shook their heads. My knee, which had undergone surgery 2 months earlier, had started to ache, and my toes were bleeding. Worst of all, I was supposed to meet a former student in Chinatown in 45 minutes. My hotel, I knew, was several miles from Chinatown. With mounting fatigue and anxiety, I ran on. And then, at last, an urban oasis appeared, a bus stop. A huge city map covered the back. 6 miles from my hotel, I calculated. Enough is enough. I'm riding back. A bus approached and squealed to a stop. I hobbled up the steps and appealed to the driver. I don't have any money, but please, is there any way I can have a ride? I've run 22 miles and my knee is killing me and I'm lost. His eyes were as impatient as his voice was gruff. Can't do that. My eyes filled and I quickly backed down the steps. Humiliated, I started walking up the street. Shawn, you idiot. Who goes running in a strange city with no money? You stupid country bumpkin, of course he can't give you a ride for free. Then every hard luck case would be begging for a mercy ride. This is totally on you. But still, why couldn't he at least have said, I'm sorry? Does the city make people cold, indifferent? Does urbanization destroy human kindness? The tears continued to slide down my sweaty face as I trudged on. I felt sloshing in my Nike and looked down. One shoe had turned crimson from the blood seeping through my sock. At the next bus stop, a bearded man on crutches hopped into my path. The cast on his leg looked heavy and cumbersome. I lowered my streaked face and swerved to avoid him. Wait, he said, do you have a long way to go? I nodded, unable to speak past the golf ball in my throat. Here, he said, here's $1. I was on that last bus, but you got off before I could give it to you. As we stood side by side waiting for the next bus, new tears silently poured down my cheeks. this anonymous stranger, cast and all, had interrupted his journey to take care of me. Wiping my face on my shirt sleeve, I suddenly remembered the next two lines of the song.
If you're going to San Francisco, you're gonna meet some gentle people there.
So I'm really excited to hear about your moment of kindness. Someone holding the door, someone acknowledging you, someone wishing you good morning.
Thank you. Should we start writing now, or can we take some time to ask you questions? And
Oh, absolutely. I know I stopped a little early. Does this Zoom continue?
Yeah, it goes, if you're fine for questions.
Okay, sure.
So I just want to know what happened.
Yeah, did you make it? Make it in
So
Chinatown?
finish that story. So did you ever go to San Francisco? Did you teach there? You didn't?
I did not.
Yeah.
I came to Charlotte, actually. That's where I met Peter, so it's happily ever after. Yeah, no, and I was a bit late for my coffee with my former student, but it was such a meaningful coffee because he said, remember when you had us write in those dumb journals in 11th grade, and all I did was sit there in agony and wait and wait and wait until you said we could stop, and I never wrote anything. It's like, yes, Bill, I remember that. And he said, well, I can't remember where he went to college, but he had spent a semester in Brazil. And for him, this young man was gay, but he hadn't come out, and he hadn't recognized that until he was using his pencil and writing, and went through a lot of self-understanding in Brazil. And he said, I filled so many journals, and I couldn't wait to tell you. So anyway, that was a really beautiful coffee once I finally got there. Yeah.
Are you the only writer in your family?
Well, Peter writes a lot. I guess. Yeah. We didn't have a TV growing up, and so we were raised in a very literary household. I mean, we read a lot. And I think that probably is true for everybody in this room. We were of a generation where screens were not primary, they were very secondary. So I think our parents both hand wrote us letters, and that was certainly a form of making meaning, making art. And all of us did that for quite a while. Yeah. I still handwrite letters to our children. But at college now, if you get a letter in your mailbox, you are sent a text with a picture of the letter, and then you know to go and get your, it's not like you go check your mailbox every day, because usually there's nothing there.
I have a question, and you can tell me you don't want to answer it, or you can make Dr. Kirkendall answer it. Why do we find it so hard to be empathetic to people who are different, people we don't like? I mean, the whole thing, talking kindness and empathy, and sure, I can have empathy for people I know, people I like. It's not always so easy for those that I don't care for, those on the other side of the political table. Any sense of why that's so hard for us?
John, you ready to take this one on?
You in some areas of life, you find it a lot easier than others. For example, John, I have a hunch that where you are in ministry is far more empathetic with people of different religious beliefs than perhaps it was when I entered ministry 60 years ago. Sometimes empathy is framed for us by the larger environment, and also antipathy is sometimes the same way.
And my response probably would be fear and ignorance. And I think that is one of the reasons that art, whatever its form is, for me it's reading, it opens worlds to me, and I am much more empathic if I understand a world that I didn't understand before. My daughter just had an assignment, a reading about 2 refugee families, one from Syria and one from, I can't remember. And she had this thick book, and she said, I do not want to read this book. And 3 days later, she said, you and Daddy have to read this book. It's so good. and it was just really interesting because I think we all have opinions on immigration and the border, et cetera. And all of a sudden, when it's stories of families, it really opens our empathy in unique ways. So I think our lack of empathy may indeed be because we don't understand, or we're afraid. And that fear has many levels. But is it we are afraid that we are threatened? I don't know. But yeah.
I was thinking of the man who gave you the $1 for the bus. And of course, it's a different time and we're really polarized right now, but he saw a need. And so it was a way for him to respond. And it wasn't, well, is she on this side, or is she from here, is she from there? It was that human experience. And I think that even now, I was talking to a neighbor where there was this gathering of people loading all this food for Asheville. And there were people on both sides. There were people wearing Harris shirts and people wearing Trump shirts, but everybody was doing the same thing because they had something bigger than themselves. And they didn't even look at politics. It was, we're here to help somebody in need. So I think that when we see the human pain, the human need, like our heart goes out because they're just a human being just like me. And I think then it's easier to cross any kind of divide because we're not responding to this abstract, well, it's not very abstract, to this bigger framework. We're just responding to a human being in need.
I love that image of people from all sides coming together.
Because something bigger than they were,
Yeah.
people who are in need. Yeah.
But it's like it takes a trauma to do that.
Yeah.
You know, the goal is to do that regardless, which we're not getting there very gracefully. But you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I'm talking a lot.
No, that's great.
One of the things that the church is doing, and I know Missy and John have been part of that, maybe you a while back, were the conversations, bridging the gap conversations, where we talk about in small groups contentious issues, potentially contentious issues. Mm-hmm. And what really makes a difference is to get to know the human being and why they think that way. What's their experience? And so once you see the human dimension,
Yes.
then you can say, okay, now I understand why you think that way. Whereas before, it's just this blanket, abstract understanding, and you're in or out.
Right.
But so I think these conversations have really been important, just to see underneath.
I think a lot of times we forget that we're so much alike and that we need to find our common ground before we are pointing fingers or trying to find how we disconnect. I think our goal should be to connect.
And again, it goes back, in my opinion, it goes back to the story. Once we know someone's story, then that humanity comes out.
it's gonna be interesting this week because there's a new movie coming out about why Trump is the way he is. And it's been shown in Cannes and out in Sundance.
Huh.
And it's gonna, I forgot the name of it. Nobody else knows.
No, I didn't even know about it in
Anyway, it
Sundance.
starts with his young life and his relationship with his father.
Huh.
So,
And so,
I don't
it
know if
may
it's
be
gonna
a-
change any minds or not.
Sure.
But it
But
maybe
again, it's a
gives
story.
them understand
Yeah.
his story.
yeah,
So we'll see. And it's interesting that it's coming out
right,
just
right.
weeks before the election. So
Huh.
it's liable to raise few hairs. I don't know where this year. I mean, it's a movie.
Yeah, wow.
You know, I was thinking about that poem. I may have not walked in your shoes before, but let me open the door for you. Is that what was that? Yeah, let me hold the door.
At least I did.
Oh, I see, but I can see your souls are worn, your strength is torn. Okay, that's cool. I was wondering, so it's not abstract. They saw the human being. They saw your souls are worn, your strength is torn. That's you, Shawn, out there, wait, getting kicked off the bus. Yeah.
All right, so have fun with this, and if it feels onerous, just come and listen. No pressure whatsoever, but I think it's a very easy assignment, and I think we all need to hear it now.
Can I just ask a question of people here? So as you consider writing that story, will you be hesitant to get up there in front with the mic, or would you be more comfortable reading it from your seat and we'll bring in a microphone? Does anybody have any trepidation about going up there?
You know, Pam, this is kind of an awkward setting. I'm gonna, as one who's fallen on the steps, I'm gonna suggest a microphone might be better.
So if we do the other reason I was thinking about the microphone, this is just honest. Like I was saying, okay, I don't know that I'll read, I know what I would want to write about, but I don't know if I want people to know that that's me. You're like, oh, Pam, look at that, whoa. But if I was doing it here with the microphone, nobody would see me.
Okay, so we'll have some pretty background, and then
That's-
we'll take a microphone
That's just
around.
me. I mean, does anybody else in
And
the
you
same?
can disguise your voice as you say.
I'll have John read
Probably not gonna know what you can.
I have a comment, Pam.
Yeah.
I'm sitting on the back row, and I could listen better if you were standing up there.
Well, I'll go like this.
Maybe just
We'll see, Lacey. We'll see.
So we'll ask John for a portable mic. And then
Yeah,
we'll-
have another portable mic that we had when we were over at the congregation house. And so we'll do the portable mic.
But even if I can't see your face, okay. I just made my comment.
No, I'm with you. Thank you, Shawn.
Okay.